today, like, what I really wanted to break in on is one of the biggest reasons why we're here, kind of just reared its ugly head again in terms of the fact that we were looking online and we were really debating on whether we wanted to commit to this full time or not, and a national photography competition was won by an AI program. So like basically a guy submitted a photograph that wasn't a photograph. Like there was no camera involved, nothing. They were working with an AI program and completely digitally created a photograph that won a national photography
world photography.
World.
Yeah, so the Sony World Photography Contest.
Right. So I feel like what that means in terms of being a photographer is, one, we just moved to a new area. So like there's trying to break into a market, there's trying to break into like this is a small town, so like there's a lot of handshaking. And when I first got here, one of the biggest problems I had is like you're competing, or at least I was competing against people who were drastically worse than me. And I'm not like this isn't me trying to be starting fights with people I'm no longer trying to compete with, but just from the standpoint of making money and having a business, you look at somebody's skills and they're objectively unskilled. Like they it's the idea of like I picked up a camera and now I'm a photographer, and they have they're hobbyists. Is the way I would say it.
Or you go down to your local community college and you take the one class.
Right.
And now, your first gig and you're a photographer.
Right. Like
Sure.
You're getting paid. And one of the other things I was seeing is I used to be in marketing, and a lot of what I used to do was like product photos. And now there are so many apps that do essentially what I did. Like I'm not going to say 100%, like I'm not going to say that like, you're unskilled, but whatever, but it's getting 85-90% of the way there. And when I can buy an app on my phone that costs $5-10 and it does 90% of the editing, like I can just it teaches you how to take a photo that would normally take a lighting rig and a professional editing suite, and they replicate that for $5 or $10. One photo for me costs more than $5 or $10 for me to do it professionally. Not to mention, like, they would have to send whatever the product is to me to go through my studio and do all the things. Like I just saw the death knell. Like because what ends up happening is like that 5 or 10%, while it does make a difference, most people are like, yeah, but like to hire me is hundreds or thousands of dollars. To get 90% of the way there on a smartphone is $5 or $10. Like, the whole idea is if you're arguing, you're losing. So like me trying to argue for myself and say, yeah, but that 5 or 10% does make a difference, and this is what the professionals use. I really think that we're getting to a place of where even children, they did a study recently for kids that are like 10, 12, like people who've grown up like their entire lives in the
post-technology era.
Right, like the post-smartphone era, and it's like if a photo isn't vertical, they don't like it. Like there's like something about
the 3x5 is not a thing anymore.
Right, like the old the old formatting, the wide, the angular things, and it's like now, like with the Apple, like with the phone that we have like it replicates bokeh, so it's a very digital program that they put the blur in.
Sure.
And to me, it looks awful. Like it's a digital program, but it's now
it's close enough.
Well, it's not close enough, but here's the thing: to younger people, they prefer that. They prefer that look, like that digital not digital, but that manual, mechanical glass, like the living look that I like. Because like
it's not a thing anymore.
Because I remember when specifically Sony started with their movies, and especially with like the 4K televisions, like there is a amount of digitalness that look has between their
It's
cameras.
like that really surreal, like...
It's the uncanny valley, almost.
Yeah, and actually, to be honest, like, I don't like it.
Right.
To be honest, like, if there's a certain level of high definition that once you reach, I'm out. Like, it makes me nauseous.
Yes, it doesn't look good at all to me personally. Like, there's something... Because, like, film... if you want to talk about, like, the old film stocks for cameras and 35 millimeter...
Sure.
In trying to modernize that, it's about 12 megapixels, or around 4K.
Right.
But there's something about, even when you're talking about, like, the larger film stocks, the medium format film, it doesn't show pores the same way. Like, there's an amount of detail that's smudged.
Yeah.
Like, there's an amount of sharpness you can't get to in that. Now, and it's like now a high megapixel camera is somewhere between 60 and 100 megapixels.
Right.
So compare that to 12.
Which, ironically, then you add in the blur with filters.
Right.
So you up the definition to such a degree that you have to then back it out with a filter.
Right.
Because people don't like the way they look when you can literally count their little microscopic hairs on their face. Like, it's whatever. But yeah, so this guy wins... So this Berlin guy wins the world competition under a pseudonym.
Right.
And then, upon receiving the award, rejects it and says, hey, just to let you know, this is actually an AI image. So he actually did it not necessarily in order to win, as a ploy to cheat. He did it as a... hey, I bet that even the experts won't notice that I used AI and I'm bringing attention to a problem, which is AI is now getting to a level that you can't even fool experts, which is terrible.
Well, it's funny because, like, when you showed me the photo, like, I think the reason why it won, because I don't love the image, but I think from a technical aspect, it looks like it was made... Like, different parts of the image look like they were made with different eras of technology.
Well, that's actually the description that they used, at least on one of the news sites, was eerie. That the photo looked eerie. But I think one of the reasons why it looked that way was because you couldn't quite pinpoint how the image was made.
Or when it was made.
Or when it was made. It was very kind of ambiguous.
Right.
But for different people, like, I'm a digital artist, whereas you're a photographer.
Sure.
For different people, like, I could key in on different things that I was like, that's why it looks weird.
Right.
So for you, it's the different technologies.
Right, like the face couldn't be that sharp using old, but, like, there was different forms of distortion and film. Like, it's hard to place. And, like, knowing that it came from an AI amalgamation... What they did is they're like, well, people like a sharp face, so, like, they created that, I'm sure, whatever.
The AI program.
Right.
The they is weird to think of, like, personifying.
But then, like, a lot of the, like, other parts, they're like, well, this was really popular from this era. And it's like they took the bits and pieces that people like of different eras and different technologies and amalgamated it.
Right, which is what AI does.
Right, and, like, I think that's why it won, because it does. It looks very uncanny valley and eerie, because it's like, if you were to tell me and swear that this was a picture that somebody made, I have no idea how you would make that in a, like, technical standpoint. So from a, like, if you actually used a camera to make that image, yes, it has, a lot of technical things that I have no idea, that I have no idea how you would make, but, like, hearing it's an AI, it totally makes sense. But to a greater degree, like, I think the issue is it's like what I can do, like the way I was taught, the way you were taught as a professional. Images take hours, if not like if you want something that technical, and again, I couldn't do something to that degree without using AI. But that would take me a day or 2 days or 3 days to make one image. And it's like, I'm sure that AI took...
Maybe a day.
Maybe a few seconds even.
Sure. Like, well, we don't know. Because, like, this guy, is a professional photographer who's entering into a global competition. Right. So maybe he fiddled with it. Maybe he, like, AI started it and then he photoshopped it. Like, we don't know necessarily the details of that. But regardless... like he wins. And it didn't take him, I'm
Right.
sure, thousands of dollars of equipment and a studio and lighting and
Right.
planning and all the things. Anyways, whereas from a digital standpoint, like you could tell from the eeriness of the the oddities in the image, whereas from like a digital artist standpoint, I know that AI has problems with details. So for example, like fingers, toes, like eye shapes, like it'll do like eyes really well independently of a face. But when it puts eyes on a face, like sometimes the size is a little bit too much, or like it's just those fine details.
Sure.
So in this photo, the fingers are square. Like
Right.
it couldn't get the fine details. That to me is like, that's how I know that this is AI, but from a digital artist standpoint.
Right.
And so, yeah, like how do you then have, so if you're going to have a photography contest, now you need digital artists to back the photography judges.
Right. Well, I mean, it's funny enough because it was already going that way before that
Sure.
to a lesser degree, where like they would like one of the things that was. I mean, this has been going on probably 10, 15 years now, where they'll take an aspect of an image.
Right.
So like a face, like we get the face right, so whatever, and then you like compile different aspects, and like there's sometimes fantasy elements and
Right.
drawings, and like they kind of just build an image
Sure.
digitally, and I never liked that as a thing.
Right.
Like,
They always look, well, they look video game-ish.
which
Yeah.
again, like I feel like it's just an aesthetic thing that I don't particularly like.
Sure.
But there's a lot of people who wanted it, and I can do them, but again, like you used to have to pay a ton of money. Like it could take a studio, because there's so many little images that you have to capture to compile. It could take a studio a week, 2 weeks to take the 40 or 50 different images and like compile them and like edit them and get them right. Like it was very expensive, and there was like studios that would focus on that. And if you don't actually have to take any of the photos and it's just a computer compiling it together, I would imagine, like, again, it might not be at the place now, like, where you're saying that there's problems and there's things that it can't do right.
Right.
But it's getting better all the time. And if it's 90% of the way there, and I used to have to hire a whole studio to work a month, which would cost, let's say $20,000.
Right.
And I can, like, go to an AI and get this done for a $10 subscription.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, well, even now, like, so like with product photos, right? Specifically, the main thing is you want it to have no background, like just white.
Right.
Well, now even with the iPhone, you can just, with no app download, it's just a stock program.
Sure.
You just tap on the main image, and it actually just lifts the main image right out, and takes the background out. And again, to your point, it's 90%. But if I'm a small business, why am I going to pay a professional photographer when I can get 90% of the way there for free on my phone?
Right.
And consumers, let's be honest, like, are really consumers going to say, well, I'm not going to buy this blouse from this boutique because they have a little bit of feathering on the edge of their shirt?
Well, and
like,
I mean, I see that point, but I also think there's in my mind, and again, I feel like I'm just old in thinking this way. But it's like when I see problems and things look a little janky on a thing, it's like my projection of a company when I think about it is, if they can't even bother with this, where else are they cutting corners?
Sure.
But I don't think that people care anymore. Like I think that people, in the same way that like they like the vertical, they like the selfie look, they like the fake blur, like those little problems, because they can relate to it of, they did it on their iPhone, so they're relatable because they have an iPhone.
Well, the flip side of that is they're doing their best, which is like, I want to support small business, and they're doing their best. Like, I'm willing to accept less because I'm willing to relate to them and say they're doing their best.
I think that's a part of it, because it's relatable, because like if let's say hypothetically, like you have a company that does all their product photos themselves on an iPhone, and one that hires me. Right, so like I do a better job, but it looks like a studio job.
Right.
But they pay however much money. It almost looks like, well, the person who used their iPhone, they're not like there's a certain degree of I can't relate to the professional, but I can
Right.
relate to the mom and pop.
Right.
who's
I'd
doing
much rather go to the mom and pop and have a conversation with
Right.
them and have them brag and say like, "Oh my god, I figured out this
Right.
skill. I'm not real good at it yet. Like I'm
Right.
practicing, but it's that like I'm doing my best.
Right.
I'm trying, I'm learning, like I'm doing this for you."
Right.
Whereas with the other one, it's very like, "Oh, you're out of my league and I would rather not
Sure.
fish in that pond because now I feel
Right.
inadequate."
Yeah, I feel like that no one actually bothers to develop skills, so then it becomes an issue of like, well, I can't relate to someone who has skills since, everyone's education is going to crap now. So like everyone's kind of a dum-dum and just lives on their phone and like, but we can relate to other people who are in the same boat.
Right. Yeah. Like we're all in the same boat.
Right.
And because we're all in the same boat, let's support this. Which it sounds like we're shitting on small businesses, but we're not because we're both small business owners.
Right.
Like that's not a thing.
Right.
And
But
I really would. And actually, to be honest, like you being a professional photographer, like before we met, I was still taking my own product photos on my iPhone, not because, not for any reason that had anything to do with not wanting a professional photographer, but simply not being able to afford it.
Right.
And so, like, that's also a thing.
But, like, here's the thing is, like, I feel like there used to be more of an ecosystem where, like, small businesses would hire a promotion and whatever. And it's like, when you have the economy being what it is and you have inflation being what it is, dollars go less far.
Right.
And things are, like, they're like, because like let's just say a restaurant for instance, right?
Oh my goodness, like, well, every restaurant now can't even afford to redo their menu,
right? Because the prices of the prices of the raw food keeps increasing, so they have to keep increasing the menu, which means rather than like buying a new menu, they're just like penciling in the new price because it's going to change next week or whatever it is.
Which used to be something you would hire a professional advertisement company or a professional photographer to take all those photos, do all the layout, and do it for you. But because they can't even afford it, like they'd rather just white out and
like pencil it in. And like that's becoming the norm when we go out to see that. And exactly that. But I'm also willing to bet that if you were to talk to most restaurant owners right now, even with a lot of the bailouts with COVID, they're still took a huge hit.
Absolutely.
People can afford to go out less, so like the number of overall, product that they're selling is less. But then on top of that, I'm willing to bet that with the increase in the cost of, like I said, just food in general, that their margins are actually much smaller now because I'm willing to bet that because you're dealing with less people going out to eat.
Right.
And because you now have a smaller profit margin, if they actually increased it to have the same percentage margin that they had before COVID,
it wouldn't be tenable.
No one would come.
Right.
So everyone's just lowering their prices, which is lowering their profits. Even though the prices are increasing, it's still lowering the actual amount of money that they're able to keep from a sale.
And let's be honest, restaurants weren't ever, especially mom and pop restaurants, weren't ever in the huge profit margin to begin with.
Correct.
I mean, if they made enough to stay open and made a living wage, and that was more than enough.
Right.
And restaurant owners are married to their restaurant, they never leave.
Right.
So.
Right. So again, we're not trying to crap on anybody, but it's just things have changed so drastically where people are getting cut out, and a lot of jobs went away. So it's now you have an issue of everyone thinks they're a photographer, everyone went out and bought a camera. So it's going to a new market where I'm not already established. It's now oh, well, you'll fit in wonderfully because there's 200 photographers in where we live in a small area, and it's I look at some of them, and they're just you would not pass intro to photography as a class.
Sure. I mean, I smile and kind of giggle to myself because there was one photo we saw in the county wedding magazine. So this is a county wedding magazine.
Right.
And the photo that not only the publisher chose, but the photographer submitted is a bride on a pier. And there's a snake in like on the pier.
Right.
And so I'm like, not only did the photographer say, yes, this is one of my top, let's say 5.
Right.
So out of my whole portfolio, this is my top 5 photo. So not only that, so then the editor accepts that as we're still going to publish this photo. And nobody even thought to maybe like crop the photo or even like the editorial.
I don't think they could have. I mean, when I think back to the photo you're talking about, one, it's out of focus. I think the snake is in focus and the couple's out of focus.
Right.
But it's not like on purpose. It's just like the camera was hunting and the guy didn't know what he was doing. There, like you could tell it was a really old camera.
Sure.
Because the dynamic range was crap. Like it was kind of like one of those things where like you were doing your like white balance and your not white balance but your exposure on the face of the couple, but then because it was so bad of dynamic range, everything is blown out white for lighting, and there was also like some weird color fringing from like just dynamic range being off. And then, like, you have... So, like, what I think is it was probably an older camera with lower megapixel, so you couldn't have cropped without, like, getting the pixels, like, individually, like, stretched.
Right. My point, though, was that even the editor, like, the editor of the magazine, if it was me, I would have even just tried to, like, cut the photo so that, like, the text is over it or something. You know what I mean? Like, at that point, I'm just, like, you're working with the bottom of the bottom barrel, and you're just trying to make it look as good as possible. So, like a sticker over it, a label, whatever. Anything. Just cover the freaking snake. It's
so
like...
it's wandered
like,
into
just,
frame.
like, wandered into frame.
Like, it's not like it's it's not a subject in the photo. It's just, like, there. It's just, they didn't... I don't know. Like, it just feels to me like, you know, you do a wedding, you're talking 150, 200 photos, right? And then you probably submit your top 5 or 10, and that was one of the ones the editor selected as the top 3 to actually post in a thing. And, like, that was the worst case that we saw, but even the person who's the best in town, like, quote unquote best in town, like it's the most gig, is the largest business, her top 3, there would consistently be like one good photo and then, you know, a really, really bad...
Well, it was the like 2/3, 1/3 rule.
Right.
Like, and so the 2/3, 1/3 rule is the like, as long as I'm good, like really good 2/3 of the time, I can afford to be bad 1/3 of the time.
Well, again...
And so that was her shtick, where she had like, you know, 2 really good photos and a bad one. But like, not just bad, but like really bad.
But here's the problem. Again, it's not 2/3, 1/3, because... Again, she was able to get 2 or 3 really good photos out of 150, 200 in a wedding. So it's not like that 2/3 of them
Oh,
are
I see
good.
what you're saying. It's not like I mean, this is of the published. We don't even know what's unpublished.
Right, but you would imagine that the unpublished ones are worse. Like if you're going to like here's the thing about being a professional, especially for event photography, is that, you know, if you give me enough time and enough lighting and enough equipment, I can make anything look good. Like, I can make something perfect. But the thing about a professional is not who can do the best in that situation most of the time, especially in a, you know, like a...
dynamic environment.
Right, a dynamic environment where you're a time. It's who can, like, problem solve to get professional level. Like let's say that you have a 1 through 10, you know, quality of picture, right? And let's say that professional is 8, because you're never going to get to 10. 10 doesn't exist. Like 10 is like the mythical thing that we're all working towards. But like let's say 7.5 to 8 is like the professional standard.
Sure.
So like let's say that like the amateur, the hobbyist can get to a 9 if they really work at it. But if you have to take 200, the average is going to be a 4.
Right.
Like the professional may never try and get to a 9 because they know it's going to be too much work. They're trying to consistently hit the 7.5. I'm not saying nothing ever dips below that, but you're always within that range.
You're in that range. Which I think that actually, what was most interesting about what you said is the unicorn, which is 10. So like even that is a very older mentality, whereas this generation is very much of the mind, why give me an unattainable goal? Like if unicorn doesn't exist and the highest I can ever get is 10, then allow me to do the 10, and you can call the 10 and 11, knowing that I'm never going to get there. But in their mind, this lowers
Well, what ends up happening
it lowers your expectation. It lowers your product. Because
what ends up happening is that their attainable 10 is no longer a 10.
Exactly.
Because, like, well, here's the thing, though. Then it's not even a 9. Because, like, a 9's really hard to get.
Right.
So, their 10 becomes the minimum standard for, like, what I would say. Like, I was saying it's a 7.5.
Yes, exactly. That's my point.
But then, they're like, well, I'm now... If I can get a 7.5 on my new scale, so like what you end up with is like you average 5.
Yes, which
4 or 5.
Yeah, which brings me back to the like 2/3, 1/3. Like
right.
If I can do great, attainably. If I can do attainably great, 2/3 of the time, then the remaining third is always going to be really bad.
Right.
Because you've shifted the entire scale.
Right.
To fit the narrative.
But again, like the idea photographer of like the old thing was is you go to school and like we've had a conversation about this where, and I'm not trying to make this all about photography, but like for those who don't know, like this isn't a photography channel, it's just where we're coming from. But like in the old days, like everything was done manually, and I don't mean like a manual dial. I mean you actually had to go and like with a light meter and check your entire scene to figure out what the light source hitting every single thing that you were photographing was.
Sure.
And then you come back and you do math in your head to figure all of that out, and then you would also figure out the lighting that you were going to like put onto it to add. So you're like doing like basically calculus math yourself.
Right.
To figure out. And you also had to figure out that most of the time you're doing autofocus yourself. If you go back to the rangefinder days before you had the DSLRs, you were doing math to figure out what the focus should be on.
Right.
Without actually ever seeing the image. Like you're doing math. And like we've updated that and made it easier for quality of life, but now like everyone's like, oh, well, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this.
Well, now you can even do lighting on your phone. Again, right. Like your iPhone will do a portrait mode where it'll throw light digitally. So it'll digitally throw light onto the image. Mm-hmm. And I know it'll do it post photo.
Right.
I'd have to go back and check, but I really want to say that you can do it during.
Yeah,
you can test the feature
right.
Like live, and you're not setting up lighting, you're not doing anything. Like this is all AI.
Right, and these are like almost auto features to where like this is what a professional would have done.
Right. So
like we're going to input that and it's just going to add it.
And now the new 14, which is weird when we got the new phones.
Right.
This is the first time it's ever asked us for pre-preferences.
Right.
So like, what's the preferred color look? What's the preferred, and I can see that very quickly getting to an iteration where you say, what's the preferred portrait look?
Right.
And where it'll throw the portrait light on it automatically without you even having to go into that mode.
Right.
And so like that to me is
it's freaky.
Weird. But as a professional photographer, like that's terrifying.
Right.
Like,
well, that's kind of like why we're going to this, because like I'll just give you an example. Like we want to do a podcast, and it's like, so to give you an idea, like I used to work for a couple of like TV networks and like doing news and segments and things, and I have all the professional equipment. Like I have an external recorder, cords and batteries and everything else. And to be realistic with you, the battery and the heat sink and some of the tech on my iPhone is easier. There is a solid state drive that everything records to, and I can do the editing on the phone itself. I'm not having to take like, even with doing an external monitor and recorder, like I have to take the solid state drive out and then hook it into another machine with a cable and put it over here and then upload it into my editing software and then, and then do my edits and then export and then reformat and like there's so many steps and time things. It's just easier doing it on my phone. Now, again, like I feel like with this new business, I'm just embracing the 90% rule because nobody cares. I feel like a lot of what we're going to be doing is actually paying for some of those AI services to do the intros, doing the music, doing whatever, because I feel like that's where we're going, is we're just embracing the cheap,
Well, not only is it the cheap option, it's cheap and easy. So there's two things, right? Which really does cut down on workload. The problem is, though, what do you do with the people that it's displacing?
Right.
So, like, I mean, we talked about this earlier when we were making the logo for our business, which, again, coming from a digital artist standpoint, you know, it took us, and that this is like a married couple working together, so communication is easy and fast. It took us no less than 14 days.
Yeah, something like that.
To come up with a viable live logo.
Right.
Right?
I mean, we were most of the way there in probably 4 or 5 days, but like a lot of the little
like
detail.
the little things, you know? And that, so a bulk of the work, let's say, a bulk of the work takes a week. And the minutia you figure out after like looking at it and mulling it over, and that's the other 5 days or whatever. But like the first 5 days worth of work for two people who are really good at communicating and in close proximity, you could do with AI, which displaces my job completely in 15 minutes or less. So you just cut out 5 days of human work down to 15 minutes. And if you as a consumer buy this program or this service for $5, why would you pay me $200 to create your logo and you have to wait a week for it and then you have to edit it or go back to them for another 5 days? Like, you would have to build that in and say, hey, you have 10 days to come back to me for like minor details. Most of them do because they'll say like, oh, the shade of yellow isn't quite right. Totally understandable. Like, that's not a complaint. It's just part of the process. But like, why would you pay $200 to me and work with me for 2 weeks when you can get 90% of the way there yourself? And let's be honest, you're never as hard on yourself as you are on somebody else, because as soon as you start paying somebody, you're like, well, I paid you for perfection. So I'm going to get my money's worth, but why would I do that to myself?
Right. But I feel like the thing is if you go to an AI, right? So like if I were to make a label, you know, a logo, whatever, the same thing, and I type in a few words and I describe it and it comes up and I fiddle with it for 10 minutes. And then I get like to a level that I think is professional enough. Like you said, you're not going to be as hard on yourself as you are somebody else.
You're like, yeah, it works.
You're going to say it works. You're not, because you didn't pay anything really for it.
Exactly.
But the other part of it is it feels like something you made.
Right, there's that personal pride of like, I made this.
Even though it was the AI.
Even though really it was the AI, like it was your idea. Or maybe you, and that's the other thing with like AI and like Google imaging searches now, is like, I think the reason why AI is so fast, like to your point, which is you don't need a photographer to take 200 photos and then amalgamate them manually. AI has access to thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of stock photos. So there's just millions of stock photos, and as a human, you can go through them and kind of get an idea of what you want. So you're really relying on AI the entire process because it wasn't your idea to begin with. Like, you looked through the stock photos, you picked out what you liked, then you told the AI, this is what I like, this is what I want, give it to me in a way that I want it.
Well, I feel like one of the things that, you know, I was reading that one of the things as you age, that you age out of the fastest is music. So, like, for instance, the last good music that I can think of is probably like 2007, 2008. Like, after that, there's really almost nothing that's been created that I personally like. And it's like, I feel like when you think of your parents, or you think of your grandparents, like, you know, there was whatever they considered music, and they stopped. Like, there's a period of time where they're like, and we stopped.
And we're done. And there might be the onesie-twosies that they really like because they're reminiscent of the old artists, or their original band that they liked might have made a new thing, so they like that album. But yeah, by and large, people, you can tell when people are from by the music that they like.
And like one of the biggest complaints about modern music that I've heard is, one, it's homogeneous, it all sounds the same. And two, it's much simpler. So, but the other thing is that the entire population of younger people like fewer artists than we did back in the day. So like in the, you know, like I'm a huge metalhead, 80s metal, like, is the thing. But there's at least, you know, 30 to 100 bands that people will say are their favorite from that time who are similarly whatever, and like even though I might not agree, we can kind of like, oh okay, like
I heard
we're on
them.
the same thing. But like metal isn't even the like end all be all. Like there's pop music, there's
country music,
there's whatever,
R&B, rap,
right. And nowadays, I feel like there's maybe of any year, there's maybe 10 artists that are actually big, and within that, like the country, the pop, the rock, the rap, it all kind of homogenizes and sounds the same. Like country doesn't sound like country to me.
No,
anymore.
well because what happens is the one artist will start in one genre, and it happens all the time.
Right.
So like Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift started country, but really, while country, oddly, statistically, country is the biggest grossing, like it's most consistent because it just has like a solid fan base. But that's not where the money is. So you have these country artists come up in the country genre. They gain a following and a loyalty, but they hop over to
but
pop.
The country fans will follow them over.
So I mean, really, what you have is these various avenues to pop. So you have pop that feels country, or pop that feels R&B, or pop that, or it alludes to it, or it sounds a little bit like it, but really, it's pop.
Right. I mean, I feel like all country that I hear, modern, day,
it's pop.
It's pop. And, there's a little bit of country, there's a little bit of you hear rapping a little bit in country, like with rhyming schemes, but like...
Or they'll insert just the one...
Right.
Like the refrain or the...
Right.
Like they'll just have the one thrown in there.
Right.
As like a nod to, we're cool.
But it's all dumbed down and it's all super simplified. And then like, here's the thing, like when I was, before I met you and, I was out dating and whatever, and like you talk to someone who's maybe a little bit younger and they'll be like, I like all genres of music.
No, they don't.
And it's like, really? And so it's like I'll play something, like and they're like you like metal? And they're like, yeah, I love metal. And it's like they like 2020s amalgamation metal. And it's like you show them like something that's actually hard and like, whatever, and they're like, what the fuck was that? That's not music. That is not music.
That's not music. Yeah. Or that's old music.
That's old music.
That's old music. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I kind of feel like our parents must have felt that way when they were listening to our music, which is, that's not music. Like, that's trash. Like, I distinctly remember my parents being is that really music?
Well, it's funny to me, because, like, when I think of, like, my parents, which were older than your parents, like there's more of an age gap between my parents and you and your parents.
Sure. Like, I think mine is, like, let's say 25 to 28 years.
Right.
Whereas yours is almost double.
Well, my mother was 39, my dad was 42.
Yeah, so.
So, like, I was, late in life, all the things, but... they like that very simple melodic, the most complex you'll ever get is like maybe Motown they get into, maybe some of the like complex crooner stuff from like the 40s,
right,
but like really like when the Beatles came out and like the end of Elvis, like my mother followed Elvis till he died.
Right, and again, but that goes back to our point of like you pick an artist or what have you, or a favorite band, and you follow them, and that might stretch out, further than the 90% of music that you like, but it's not the music. Right. It's the artist.
Right.
Right.
And because they kind of keep a similar style, and like they're kind of aging with you.
They're relatable.
And I feel like that was some of my bands that they will still come out with new music, but it sounds like the shit they were making in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
And I think that's a thing. But my point is I feel like the music that I liked was too complex for them.
Right. They didn't like it.
And like now, I feel like the music has just gotten
too simple.
Way too simple.
Yeah.
And it's like I just like I feel myself getting dumber listening to it.
Well, really, I mean, this isn't like headline news. It's something that should be common knowledge, which is I want to say that there's like between 2 and 5 baseline beats and chords that make up 90% of all pop music.
Right.
And it's really just like the 2 or 3 chords. Right. And really what they'll start with is the chord. because they already know that it's a selling chord.
Right.
So why deviate from the moneymaker when you
Sure.
can just stay on the chord you know that sells?
Sure.
Like, which is why, to your point, it all sounds the same. It
Right.
sounds the same because it is. It's the same chord.
Right.
And you put music and words over it, but it's the
Right.
same. It's very familiar.
Right. It's
Yeah.
the familiarity. Yeah, and I also think that what you end up with is like when you see like kind of the rise of leftism and like the groupthink that like these children have is they weren't the idea of there being actual diversity of thought, diversity of like culture didn't exist.
You're right.
Like you kind of have been programmed from a very early age to conform.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I feel like this shouldn't be a headline or breaking news, but realistically, the reason why school is an 8-hour day is because children need to be supervised for the time that parents are working.
Right.
So, really, you're giving children the amount of information that they need in order to, one, not be bored, and two, be trained to do what you're told for a certain amount of time. So
Right.
you get dropped off. If the school is very familiar, year after year, you get dropped off at the same time. And maybe from elementary to high school, there's an hour change? Because like kindergartners get dropped off at like 7 a.m. and high schoolers get dropped off at 8.
It wasn't when I was growing up. Like it was uniform, and I also feel like if you think of a normal day being 9 to 5, and school time when I was a kid was 8 to 3. So like it was kind of weird in the sense that like they created it to where parents could drop the kid off at 8 to get to work by 9.
Right.
And then they would get off at 3, but typically speaking, like kids were encouraged to have an extracurricular after school.
Right, to keep them on grounds.
Right.
Which now has been fixed because now you can drop your kids off at 7 because now the schools provide breakfast. So you don't need your parents to cook breakfast, right? Because that's going to happen at school.
Right.
And then your school day is longer, so school doesn't get out till 4:30.
Right.
Right? And then if they have an extracurricular, that's 5:30, right? And so the schools now are like, they've fixed the problem of your time and my time, which is what did you used to call them, the key kids, where I forget the name of the thing, where the kids who would go home and they had a key to their own house because they were at home alone for an hour before they came home.
Right. I dealt with that.
Yeah, but now you have that less and less because kids can't even get off campus without being picked up by a parent. So even if they're not in an extracurricular, it's now a social gathering because they're not allowed off until their parent comes. Latchkey kid. That's what it was called. Yeah, so the latchkey kid problem they've fixed.
Sure.
So again, it's all conditioning the kids to stay in one space, don't leave it.
Right.
Like, you have been dropped off at this space for a designated amount of time and you're not allowed to leave until certain conditions are met, which in this case is your parents pick you up.
Right, and I feel like when I, being a latchkey kid myself, like I had sports, but there was like, there's times when like your sport isn't on.
There's seasons and whatnot.
There's seasons and what have you. When I went, anyways, it doesn't matter. But the point is I remember like you got home, you could get into shit that your parents didn't like.
Weren't supposed to, yeah.
Right, so it's like, if I wanted to listen to music that my mom wouldn't like, I'd listen to it in that like 2-hour time frame between like, when I got home and like when she got home, and really like, because my mother was also into small business, like she didn't always get home at 5, like sometimes it would be 7 or 8, so like a majority of the time I would get a budget, like she would hand me like, here's $15-20.
Right.
This is for you to buy food for dinner for yourself that you're going to be cooking for yourself for the week because I'm not going to be here.
Because I'm not going to, because I can't be...
Right.
Right. Not that I don't want to say like she wasn't responsible enough because I'm not trying to like whatever, but like because I can't guarantee.
Right.
Right. So she couldn't guarantee that I'm going to be here, so I'm going to make sure that you have a solution.
Right.
That makes sense.
But like like I would walk to the store, buy the groceries, come home, like budget everything for myself in grade school, middle school.
Sure. And let's be honest. So in that day and age, right? Because I remember my sister and I used to walk to the gas station all the time. So we would walk to the gas station, buy snacks, do whatever, and we would go back to the house. And sometimes we do it
Right.
after school, what have you. But now, let's be honest. If I were to send, let's say, our daughter in a couple of years, so she's like 13. In a couple of years, I mean.
Right.
So in a couple of years, she's like 13, 14. If she goes to the grocery store, the legitimate grocery store, and buys groceries,
Sure.
I would bet that we might not get a phone call that day, but if she were to go week after week
To get her own groceries.
to get her own groceries, even if it was only 1 week, like once a week, if she did it consistently, week after week, somebody would pull her aside and say, why are you by yourself?
Where are your parents?
Where are your parents? Whereas when I was a kid,
Yeah.
at 13, 14, I used to go to the gas station all the time.
Absolutely.
Nobody batted an eye. Nobody said, where are your parents? What are you doing by yourself? Like, why aren't you being directly supervised? Like, these were life skills. This was you and your sister need to know how to get around town safely. So,
Sure.
because I'm female, it was always, you need to travel in groups.
Sure.
So either you and your sister go together, you take one of your cousins.
Right.
I don't care what you do, you don't go by yourself.
Right.
And maybe that's different because you're male and you're like, hey, I can handle this by myself or whatever.
Well, I mean, like, I was out by myself, realistically, from about kindergarten on. Like
Sure.
the idea is like, I see this all the time on like YouTube and TikTok and all the
Right.
things where they're like, go out and when the lights, like the street
Oh
lights.
yeah, when the street lights turn out, you need to go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the thing. It was, you can play in the street, and there was a canal by our house. So like it was almost a dead end, but it was like a dead end with an L.
Right.
So like you could go down and then go down the little L, and there was a canal. And so we could play in the street, we could play in that little L section, we could go down the canal, and really it was, do whatever until the lights come on.
Right.
Till the lights come on and then come home.
Right.
So yeah, like that happened all the time.
Right, and like for us, because I had both my mother's home and my grandparents' home. So like with my grandparents, in like not even middle school, but like grade school and even pre-grade school,
Sure.
it was stay on this block.
Right.
Stay on this block. So you had like a square block, and there was a bunch of other kids, and we'd all play. And then like, if we had like, I think I had a friend like a block over, and like I kind of got allowed. If I was going, it was either stay on this block or be at his house.
Right, because like for us, so we lived on that like dead end L thing, but 2 streets over.
Right.
So like not the one right next to it, but the next one, right? My aunt lived there.
Right.
So it was either you stay in the L, but if you're going to go to your aunt's house, you just need to let me know. Like you can go.
Right.
You just need to let me know first. And then it was just, we would walk to my aunt's house, and a lot of the time, which was kind of funny, it was take this to your aunt's house, because I don't want to drive to go just drop this off, and I'm not going to visit, and I don't want to like be socially mean, so just go and drop this off at your aunt's house and come back.
Right. Well, I lived in a small town growing up, so like by the time I got into middle school,
Yeah.
it was stay in our town, don't go to the next town.
Sure.
Which was like, I want to say maybe 10 or 20 square miles.
Sure.
So like, yeah, just stay in our town.
Yeah.
And you're fine.
Yeah.
Just be back at a certain time. And like, I'd walk all over town. Like go to the grocery store, do whatever. But by the time I got into high school, it was really just be back.
Be back, yeah. Because I was going to say like the distance that I could travel obviously increased as I got older to where I was like, stay in this town. But I lived in an area where there was like 15 small towns right in a row, right on the highway, and you really couldn't tell where one city ended and the next city started. But it was all just very, very tiny, tiny towns.
Sure.
And so as I got into high school, it was, just be back. Like if you're going to be 4 towns over, that's fine, as long as you're back by a certain time.
Right, and it wasn't even by dinner time. It was like, just be home before dark or be home before.
I think mine was 10. Like you need to be home.
Like 10, 11.
Like 10 or 11, and I want to say like on a school night it might have been earlier, but definitely on weekends, like be home by 10 or 11.
Oh, on weekends it was like be home by midnight. Like
I don't think I was ever allowed to. Well, I don't remember. I plead the fifth. I mean, I want to say that it was like 10 or 11, but who knows?
Right. Whenever you decided to walk in.
Really, it was because when you get into high school, like, especially, like, the later high school years,
right.
Honestly, you're really at the, like, how much trouble am I going to get in if I come in after my mom is asleep? Like,
right.
But that's a definite, like, high school mentality.
Sure.
How much can I get away with?
Right. Yeah, and, like, I don't even think we're talking about high school. I'm just saying, like, as kids, like, I remember being in grade school going to the grocery store.
Yeah.
And I also am going to tell you, the grocery store was exactly a half mile from my house. Because it was a half mile there and a half mile there, so it was a mile walk.
Right.
And I'd be carrying whatever I bought. So, like, I would go more regularly so I didn't have to carry a bunch of crap.
For a mile. Yes.
Right. So, yeah, and that was in grade school.
Yeah, so, like, I've taken our daughter to the grocery store and legitimately given her a list and a budget and said, like, as a life skill, here's the grocery list.
Sure.
Here's the budget. I need you to buy all the groceries.
Right.
And if they're, it was when the grocery store, right after COVID, you could print out your list. Mm-hmm. And so it even had, like, the pictures. Sure. And so she was like, well, what do I do if they don't have exactly what you pictured? And I was like, well, you buy a dupe. Like, figure out...
Like an approximation.
An approximation for what it is. And you have the budget. It's right there per item, what the budget is for that item.
Sure.
And then I kind of, like, followed her around, maybe, like, 10, 15 feet back. And I must have gotten, like, the strangest looks the entire trip. Because she was... pushing the cart, she was doing the thing, she was marking off the list, and she even went through the cashier's line and paid, and even the cashier was looking at me like, what is, like, I'm not trying to, like, butt into your business, but, like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, she's buying groceries. She's like, I've been a cashier for 20 years, never have I ever
it's been 20 years since, like, we were raising people to be adults.
Yeah.
Because that's realistically what we're talking about is that, like, because here's the thing, right? Like, we're talking about, it's going to go down to 90, it's going to go down to 80% of, like, what is professional.
Sure.
But things are getting cheaper and we expect less and just the quality of things are getting worse. And it's like, we always talk about this in terms of, like, I know we made the refrigerator armor, but, like, things are just getting worse. They're getting, manufacturing is getting worse. Like you have this set of old... glass from the Depression era, and it's still there. Like we drop it more than I would like. More than I would like.
We're not like trying to
like test the whatever, but like
it occasionally gets dropped.
Right, and it doesn't break, and it's like I know for a fact if anything new, like the coffee thing that we bought a coffee a
French press,
and like it. Like
less than 30 days.
Yeah, less than 30 days. It got dropped that much in the sink, and it just shattered. And it's like, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Like,
and the worst part of that was that it was our kid that did it.
Yeah.
Because everybody feels bad.
Right.
Like, she felt bad, and then we were upset, so she felt bad that we were upset, and then, but I could have done it. Like, I washed the dishes by hand.
Right. She's a little bit less soft than she should be.
Sure. But the fact that it dropped maybe... between an inch and a half.
Right. And shattered.
And just completely shattered is astounding. Right.
But, like, that's the quality of where things are going. And it's like, things are getting cheaper, but you get what you pay for. And it's like I know that this gets talked about a lot, but, like, nails and screws and things are, like, that really chintzy quality because they're being made like for Walmart by China, like these really cheap crappy things, and it's like industrial level nails and screws are just not being I haven't even seen them in a long time. Like, I'm sure that they exist for somewhere, but it's getting harder and harder to procure them to the point that it's like you look at a house going up and you just assume like the reason why houses that were built 100 years ago are still standing and if they've been taken care of in still pretty good shape, and like newer stuff. Like, I had a cousin who bought a new house, and this was maybe 15, 20 years ago. Right. And within 10 years, it was just falling apart.
So, yes, like, the quality of things have drastically decreased. But, so check this out. So, like, as a craftsman, right? So, like, I grew up in a very, like, DIY environment with a lot of craftsmen.
Right.
And things like that. And, like, so this blows my mind. So, you can take salvaged lumber, right, from a house built in the 20s. So let's say like a standard 2x4. And you can take a standard 2x4 from, let's say, Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, your local hardware store. And the same tree wood, right? So I forget what it's called, breed, right? So you have oak, right? The oak from the 20s is actually harder than the oak from 2020 because the trees that we are harvesting from now, we artificially grow them faster. So we give them fertilizer, we water them, we do everything that we can to make them bigger faster. So what happens is the ring marks, so the growth marks on a piece of lumber from 100 years ago are tight. I mean, they're centimeters apart from each other.
Right.
Whereas wood now, the ring marks are a quarter an inch away from each other. So the wood's not as dense.
Right.
And so the other thing is, which people don't know, and I don't expect people to know, this is a total like craftsman thing, which is a 2x4 used to actually be 2 inches by 4 inches.
Right.
They're not. So lumber that you buy now, it's still called a 2x4, but what they do is they actually cut it. So you're actually not getting a 2x4, you're getting a 1 3/4 by 3 3/4. So they're not even 2x4s. And what's funny to me is that the lumber industry has corrected this by saying, well, that's because it's finished. So what they do is they shave the ends off, or they cut them closer, right? So that the 2x4s are smaller. But they're marketing, or if anybody questions them, they're saying, well, it's because it's a finished 2x4. No, it's not. It's not a finished 2x4. You're chinsing me out of
whatever,
a quarter inch on each side.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So, like, you're talking about houses not being as sturdy as they used to be. Well, yeah, your lumber is not as dense as it used to be, and also your lumber is not as thick as it used to be.
Right. So you're now having like chintzier wood that is like you're having more parts, so more points of failure.
Right.
Being held together by cheap Chinese crap.
Right.
And the other thing is, and we were talking about this the other day, is where like the idea of hiring someone who's an artisan to design the house isn't there. It's just
right. Like contractors will do it. It used to be that architects would do it. Like architects would, spend their entire career just doing house plans, and that was like their thing. And you had this, body of work.
Right.
And now contractors are to the point where they're like, I build houses so often,
I can do it.
I can do this, which maybe they can, maybe they can't. But the point is that they didn't go to school for it. They didn't get formal training for it.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you need formal training for absolutely everything, but there's a reason why architectural plans have a flow.
No one's a professional at anything.
Right. Like they have a flow, like the airflow flows correctly. Like if you've ever been in a house where you have lint that kind of circles in a hallway.
Right.
And it happens all the time.
Sure.
Where you have like a spot that just always collects dust. The reason is because it was designed by a contractor who didn't know about airflow because they never went to school professionally. Right. And so what happens is you have a backflow of air, and you're always going to have lint in that spot. It's just going to collect there forever. Huh. Whereas in an architect's house, like you won't have that. So I went to school for architecture. Another one that like just like immediately makes me so agitated is restaurants. You can tell when restaurants were designed by an architect, because you're not supposed to have the women's restroom precede the men's restroom, because it's rude. It's rude when the women's door opens and a man walks by for him to be able to see inside the restroom. So the women's door is always supposed to be the furthest down, so that a man never crosses the doorway. But when a contractor is setting up a restaurant, or just not looking at the architecture's plans.
Right.
They'll put the women's restroom first because they're thinking, well, we don't want the women to walk as far, or they're just lazy and they just put whatever, pick whichever one.
Right. I mean, now there's no difference. Like, what's a woman?
Well, yeah. I mean, now we don't even know what a woman is, so who knows, what door goes where.
Right. It doesn't matter. Yeah. I mean, it just seems like we're getting into the, like, dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber, and things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares. Because everybody's just trying to scrape by, and it's like,
sure.
I don't know. Like, it's just, I feel like the more I learn about different industries, the more I realize that everything's getting worse. Like, the technology isn't actually getting, like, the reason why we don't have flying cars is because, like...
because we are accepting less.
Because they fall out of the sky. Yeah. Like,
straight fall from the sky. Like,
right. It's not that we don't have the technology. It's that, like, nobody could afford it because, like, you'd actually have to build it well. Well,
you'd actually have to put... This isn't something you can pop into AI and have AI, give you a flying car.
Yeah, they just fall out of the sky.
Yeah.
But, like, the other big thing in the news that I wanted to touch on, which I don't have all of the, details for, and there's no reason that's been posted yet, but the FDA just stopped the allowance or the authorization to disseminate...
The COVID.
Well, two of the COVID. Like, because there's 3 different
COVID vaccines. Yeah.
And I don't remember which 2 were out, because I don't, like, I want to say
it's Moderna?
Moderna was one of them, and I don't know if it was Pfizer or the other one that also...
Johnson & Johnson.
No, I think Johnson & Johnson's still allowed. I think it was the Pfizer that
also... So Pfizer and maybe Moderna. But regardless, after all of the...
Right.
Like... After all the flack that, let's be honest, conservatives gave for not wanting to take the vaccine, and then, lo and behold,
well, I mean, there's
not safe.
Well, yeah, and I'm not going to say not safe because we don't know. Like, it's no longer being authorized. So, like, I'm not going to get into...
I'll make the assumptions that I make when somebody says... Like, when a government authority says, we're no longer authorizing this, what that sounds like to me is we're no longer accepting liability for what this might do.
Right. For the lawsuit.
For the lawsuit that may be impending.
Right. But when you sign your thing, like, you also signed away your rights to sue.
That's true. I remember that being a big thing on... So, like, I'll out myself, which was such a painful topic at the time, which I'm not vaccinated.
Right.
When I want to say...
Right.
Out of all of my immediate family, so when I say immediate family, my immediate family would include my siblings, my parents, and I have 4 because they're divorced and remarried. Right. So out of my siblings and my parents, I was the only one unvaccinated. And not only that, I then also did not vaccinate our daughter. Right. So that was like a huge, me being the only one who was not vaccinated got flack.
Well, I
could not stop.
Right. Well, I mean, for me, the only reason I got vaccinated is because I was traveling abroad, and it was required for entry into the country. But now I wish I hadn't have. Like, not only gone to the other country, but...
dumpster fire.
Yeah, dumpster fire there. But, like, I regret the thing because it's, like, all of these things about increased blood clots and, like the increased death rates from people who've had it that are not there for whatever. So, and it's also, it changes your DNA at a level.
Well, then I read an article, which I really need to go back and do more research, but this article just scared the crap out of me because I didn't even want to go back and research it, but, like, apparently morticians are finding these, like, long, fibrous protein strings.
Blood clots, yes, yeah.
But they're not blood clots. They're, like, these, it almost looks like hair.
Yeah.
Like hair clots. And the morticians are saying, look, blood clots are, I mean, not to be gross, but blood clots are globulous. They're like blobs. Sure. Whereas these are like these long protein strings that they're finding in bodies. And they're like, we don't know what to attribute it to. We don't know, like, we're morticians. We're not, doctors, we're not doctors. We're not, like, forensic scientists or what have you. But we can tell you that they're there.
I mean, I think this is going to be one of the great conspiracies going forward.
Oh my God, yes. It's like the new magic bullet. The magic bullet conspiracy theory of our generation is going to be, what the heck did COVID vaccine do?
And where did COVID even come from? I mean, because, like, when you look at the death rate, what was it, 100,000 dead? But out of that 100,000, like, it was a contributing factor, but like I remember hearing like that there was a thing in Colorado where a majority of COVID deaths also had gunshot wounds. So like they would like
Well,
so
there was
they
the
die
funding issue.
Well, they would get shot, they die of a gunshot wound, but then they test the corpse for COVID and be like,
Right.
oh, it's a COVID death.
Well, because there was the funding issue. So the
Right.
funding issue was that the hospitals would get compensated for COVID related care.
Right.
And I'm not saying, good practice, bad practice, like that's a whole other conversation. Because let's be honest, like every business in the United States is by and large a business. If you say that, they're in the business of making money.
Right.
So if I were running a hospital and I'm in the business of making money, then I'm going to make sure that my business does that and doesn't go under.
Right.
So if your business, which is caring for people, all of a sudden can't care for people because people can't leave their homes, then I'm going to do what I can to make money where I can.
Well, I also imagine when you have people on lockdown, they're less likely to be having accidents, less likely to be like hurting themselves. They're not also getting sick because while you're not going out, you're also not getting like...
You're not being exposed.
Right.
You're not putting yourself in... And I don't mean putting yourself in danger, like, on purpose. Just life.
Right.
Like, you get in the car and you get in a car accident. You didn't plan on it.
Right.
But, like, if nobody's driving, there's no car accidents.
Right. You're also not getting the cold as often. You're not getting a flu. You're not getting...
So for funding, I can absolutely see where hospitals are like, look, we're hemorrhaging money.
Right.
We've got all this staff. We have to pay these people to come in.
Sure.
They're working extraneous hours. All the nurses during COVID were working 18-hour shifts.
Sure.
So if a hospital says we need to make money and we're going to code this as a COVID death, that totally makes sense to me.
Right.
Why
well, I
wouldn't
think
you?
anytime that you're dealing with the government, because like here's the thing, right? Like the government doesn't provide a service in the like this for that kind of way.
Right.
So like like me as a photographer, I offer photography, you offer money, we come together, you get photography, I get money.
Right.
And like there's a price for that based upon what I think my stuff's worth versus what the market does, and the same
basic economy.
Right, basic economy. And it doesn't matter what the service is. The government, like their whole thing is like they provide roads. Okay, but like they don't build the roads themselves. Like they don't have they don't have like a group of people that are under government payroll that make the roads. They hire a contractor, so then they negotiate whatever, and it's based upon funding, and it's like they're always trying to grow bigger to justify themselves. So it's like when you have these organizations that are medical or law enforcement. Because, like, here's the thing, like when people get into law enforcement, and, I used to work for agencies, like, I have a pretty good idea of how this works. It's not, let's get rid of all crime.
No.
Because that's never going to happen.
That's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen, ever. So, like, what they'll get for is, like, well, there's a government program that cares about how many arrests you make in a certain thing, like on the war on drugs.
Well, yeah, I mean, what it comes down to is... Who is this crime important to?
Right.
And who will pay me for monitoring or mitigating this crime?
Right.
Because if there is a funding to decrease drugs,
right.
then I'm going to go to the government and say, okay, so for every pound of marijuana that I confiscate, you're going to give me $100,000. Well, guess what? The number one crime that I'm going to tell my police officers to look out for is marijuana. Like, why would you not?
Well, when I lived in Idaho, that was a huge thing. And, like marijuana was the number one funding for the entire government of Idaho, even though it was legal. And because it was illegal, because here's what they would do. Like, it was legal in almost all of the states surrounding Idaho. So, like, people were continually, like, you could buy it legally at a pot stand in Oregon, drive into Boise an hour away.
Right.
And, like, they would pull you over and, like, put you in jail. So, like, they get you in jail. They put all, like, first things first, they would sell the weed that they confiscated from you back to the government. And the government would give that police department money. Right. Then you go to jail, and all of the jails are for profit. But then, on top of that, they would make, like, I'm not going to say any names because I'm not 100% sure on the companies, but, like, let's say... a clothing company. So the inmates are stitching clothing to sell for a large company, and then not only is the prison getting a percentage of those profits, but so is the state. So the state gets a kickback. Then, if you are a parent who gets arrested for this, they confiscate your children, and then they have for-profit
foster and adoption yes.
programs.
So, like, and I think by and large, a lot of people just don't understand, like,
Right.
how wealth is not really spread to individuals.
Right.
I mean, wealth really is spread up here at the corporate level.
Right.
Like, the corporate and government level lives up here.
Right.
And they spread the wealth up here. But, like, the little people
Right.
never get the spread of wealth.
Right.
Like,
I mean, and here's the thing. Like, I've never really smoked weed. But at the same time, like, I just look at I don't think it's worse than alcohol.
Sure.
By any stretch of the imagination, it's probably less bad. I mean, there are things that I mean,
feel empirically, sure.
Right. Like, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of things that the weed people say, like, it's better than alcohol. Like here's the thing, right?
Right.
Like your most of it is being ingested through smoke, which does cause cancer.
Smoke in general is a carcinogen. Like,
right.
It doesn't matter if it's barbecue smoke
right.
or
right.
like weed smoke. Like, smoke is smoke.
Right.
Like,
but then there's liver damage with alcohol. There's also drunk driving. But like the idea that like you can't have impaired driving with marijuana is the issue. And I actually think that's one of the biggest issues they're having with legalization nationally, is that it's very difficult to test someone for being high. But that's the other problem. It's like, I remember I was watching a thing the other day where there was this one county, where there was this one sheriff. It's a really small county, but it was like a really small county in between two big counties, so like they would have traffic going back and forth. And he would stop like people for anything, and then he'd be like, "You're high." And because the laws are, I can impound your car and like take ownership of the car and sell it as like drug related. Like you can't like if you're growing weed at your house, you are, we can forfeiture and seize your home.
Oh.
They were doing that to people's cars. So like you're driving by and he's like, I can look in your eyes and tell that you've been smoking weed. Your car's belongs to our county now.
So I've been up for 18 hours, haven't slept because reasons.
Right.
My eyes are red. Because I've been up all night.
But there's also no documentation.
And now I'm high, and now my car gets confiscated, and I'm out of car, and I have an indictment because I was high when really I was just up for 18 hours.
Right.
And I'm exhausted.
Exactly.
That's hilarious. I mean, it sucks for those people, but like...
But the issue they were having is, how do you prove a negative?
Right.
Because like they weren't doing any form of test for like, other than just like him eyeing them.
Right.
So like
what do you do?
What do you do? Like, how do you prove that like his eyeing is wrong?
Right.
Because like in his defense, what he's going to come up with is, well, I've been eyeing people for 20 years.
Exactly.
And I've caught 17,000 people.
Of the 17,000 people, I mean, I've got a 100% success rate because none of them have complained.
Right.
Sure.
Like, they all knew they were guilty.
They all knew they were guilty.
Yeah,
of course.
That's all. I mean, but how do you argue with that?
I mean, that's the point, is that as soon as you start to defend yourself, you're done. Right. I mean, like, that's the whole point, is you can't prove a negative, and the moment you start to defend yourself, you're already done.
You're already wrong.
You're already wrong.
The moment you're explaining, you're wrong.
Yeah, the moment you start explaining. Exactly.
Right.
So, it sucks to suck.
Right.
Go buy a new car.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I mean, there was even talk of like, here he would pull people over who had nice cars. Like, because our impound lot can sell that one for more money.
Of course. I mean, not another Dodge Neon.
Yeah.
We got a dozen of those sitting in the lot, but
that Mercedes.
That's the one.
Yeah, but that's what they were doing, and I mean, you look at that on its face, and like there was reports about them doing it, and like everyone I think understands what was happening there.
Yeah.
But when you start going to prove it to fix it,
you call it. Well, here's the problem with calling into question a body of work, which is especially when you're in a profession like policing.
Right.
The reason why calling a police officer's arrest into question is really you're hoping and wanting that a police officer is going to be of the utmost ethics and integrity. Like that's your ideal police officer is somebody who is of the absolute ethics and absolute integrity. The problem is that the moment their integrity is called into question, the police department as a whole has to pull all of their cases
Right.
and then go back and question the integrity of not just the one case,
Sure.
but their entire body of work. So
Right.
when you have a police officer who's been on the job for a year and they do something stupid, it's like, okay, you've been on the job for a year. We're calling your ethics and integrity into question. You now need to go to ethics training. You need to go to integrity class. You need to go see HR, whatever, but that's fixable, right? But when you have a police officer who's the sheriff, and he's been doing work for 20 years and he's about to retire, and you're about to call his integrity on the line, not only are you cheating him out of his retirement, right? But now you are going back 20 years worth of crime.
Right. Well, let's say I'm let's say there's a murder trial and the guy actually did it.
Right.
But you can now
15 years ago.
But now you could 20 years ago.
Sure.
And now he's requesting a new trial because it was known that the guy who collected all of his evidence is having ethics violations and was lying about things. So while I think a cop might snitch the truth a little to you were smoking weed and you're not from around here, so we're going to win this case. But now you have a murderer who could potentially go through because now the DA has to retry the trial. And then they have to find evidence and witnesses who may be long dead.
Sure. And this is a whole other thing. Like, we've already, any crime show you watch, witness testimony is the worst.
Absolutely.
It's the worst. Like, you can't trust witness statements. So now, if you can't trust a witness statement that's an hour old,
right.
Now, and
25 years old.
And then the original case, it was a year old, and now you're retrying it 20 years later.
Right.
I don't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, and you want me to tell you what I saw 20 years ago?
Do you recognize the guy who did the shooting? And you look at him, and he's 20 years older.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, I don't recognize him.
No clue.
Because I think we've all had this where, you have somebody who you haven't seen in years. And
sure.
You're like, is that you? And that's somebody you know well.
Sure.
Somebody that you saw do a stabbing.
That's a traumatic event.
20 years ago? Yeah, like that. I mean, I can see why you wouldn't want to do that. But, in that case, you also have to figure, this is the sheriff of a small county. So, there, a lot of small counties, a lot of small towns are well, we're just fucking up the people from the big city, the county over, who we don't like, those outsiders. And two, when you're doing all these auctions and you're selling all these vehicles, so much money is going into the counties, the schools. I'm sure it wasn't just being kept by the police officer. You're literally redistributing wealth to this poor county. So, he never lost an election because he wasn't doing it to the locals. He was only doing it to the passerby traffic.
Right. And let's even be honest. If you're on a state line, how easy is it to be you're not from this state?
Right.
And again, we're not trying to say this shit on all police officers, because I actually do.
Right.
I mean,
both my brothers are cops. I love.
Yeah, I like police officers. I just don't like them next to me because I don't think anybody really wants to sit next to a police officer.
Right.
Nerve.
Well, I think that generally when you're around police officers for a long enough time, they're always they assume the worst in everyone, because you also have to appreciate that they're constantly being lied to, because there are horrific crimes that exist, that happen.
I mean, if you're seeing 99% of the worst things 100% of the time, I mean, it just consumes your thoughts. You can't...
Right, because you meet, you investigate a case where there's a horrible thing. Let's say somebody puts their baby in a microwave, which is just beyond what you think. And then you meet the suspects. And you have somebody who appears normal saying, yeah, I would never have done that. I wasn't there. I don't know.
Right.
It must have
and
been.
They really just look like anybody who you would meet at a convenience store, grocery store, to go to the park, whatever. They just look like regular people.
And then you find out that, yes, that person that looks normal, who talked, who's maybe educated, they did the horrific thing.
Yeah.
And it's you meet another normal person, and you're your total system is, I can't trust that.
Right.
Don't let that person in.
You're really, you're trained from kid. From childhood, if you look normal and you look nice, and maybe that's different now because normal is
under attack.
Well, normal 40 years ago is not normal now, right? But by and large, the message to kids is still the same. If a person looks safe, assume safe.
Right.
Like, assume safe first. Whereas when you're in law enforcement or in military, your assumption is never
Where's the
assume
threat? Where
safe.
is the threat?
Never assume safe. Where's the threat? Everything needs to be questioned. Everything is suspect. And so, as a police officer, I agree that police officers should retire at 20 years because really it's inhumane to have somebody with a more than 20-year career constantly under subject of the worst of the worst.
Absolutely. But like the problem is that you do have bad ones.
Sure.
I mean, just like with anything else, and I think that a lot of times it's when you have this kind of insular communities where there's not a whole lot of oversight. Because like I think in this case, and I could be wrong on a lot of the details, so don't quote me on this, but I believe it was a small county in between Kansas City and St. Louis. So you have these two big cities, and a couple of the counties in between were kind of small. I believe this is the story. It could be two other cities. I could be totally wrong in the wrong state. But they're not getting state funding. They're not getting a lot of the help that they should have. And it's like to those people, this is Robin Hood.
Sure. And to be fair, right? We assume intent, right? Because we don't know what he originally intended. Right. So we're always assuming.
Well, there's always incompetency. Like this guy could just be like, I think you're hot.
Yeah, no, like that's what I mean.
He's just. That's
exactly what I mean. Like, because we're assuming what he intended, right? So, like, he really could have pulled over the first 5 dozen, 20 people, whatever, and the first however many people could have really been high.
Right.
Right, and then it just becomes you find what you think you're going to find, right? Because now every time you pull somebody over and they're from the big cities, you're like, oh my God, not another high person who's driving through my small town who's going to hit my community, who's going to endanger my
Or there could have been a horrible
whatever.
accident where like a person who was high on weed, who admitted after the fact to being high on weed, takes out like a school bus full of children or something. I mean, it doesn't have to be that particularly. But
but now it's the crackdown of the like, you've attacked, and I mean you as like the greater you. The outsiders, have attacked my community, and I'm trying to keep my community safe, and I'm sick and tired of people who are high coming through and wrecking my town. So now if I even have the smallest suspicion you're high, I'm going to call you on it because what else do I do to keep my community safe? Right? No, that's the flip side of assuming intent. Assuming you could assume the worst, or you could assume that he really was trying to his best. And that's.
But the moment that you start arguing otherwise, the counter argument is, are you okay with drugs? Are you okay? Because don't you know in this state it's illegal to have marijuana? Why are you on the case of people who are doing an illegal activity? Here's the other thing that when it comes to weed that like I feel like I never hear enough of in the arguments, because like everybody's pro pot now. And I really, like, I don't care about the substance itself or, like, that sort of thing. The only thing that I kind of care from a social standpoint is, like I said, being able to, like, actually test to see if somebody's high for things like operating equipment or what
I mean, the only thing that I really care about, which is actually, like, it's just a thing that's funny to me, is that realistically, it's going to turn into another thing that we're taxed on. Which for me doesn't matter because I don't smoke. But realistically, for all of the people, which is to me very hilarious, for all of the people who are pro pot but don't want to pay taxes, guess what, sweetheart? You're pro the thing that the government isn't taxing because they can't figure out how. Well, they just figured out how, and now they're going to tax your pot. So
but like the biggest issue with this is the cartels. So, like, I remember when it was just outright illegal, like, pot everywhere. Like, it wasn't in California legal yet. And you'd have all the potheads, who I had a few friends of, who were like, why isn't this legal? Like, all of the things. And they're like, it's a natural thing, man, and whatever.
It grows in a garden.
It grows in a garden, all the things. And then, like, I'd talk to them, and invariably, like, 100% of pot smokers, 100% that you talk to for forever, since pot has been a thing. It was always the guy down the street. My dealer's a good guy. Like it's grown locally.
He's chill,
all the things. I can guarantee you when you look at the statistics of how much money and pot comes from Mexico, comes from the cartels, that like the chances of everyone's dealer being a good guy
Yeah.
who was unaffiliated with the cartel and it was grown down the street is bullshit.
Yeah.
It's a bullshit idea.
Well, like, I mean, what's funny to me is, like, especially in our generation, you might not, like, know, like, how it works. But, like, what you have is a plant. I mean, it works like any other spice. I mean, you do this with basil.
Right.
Like, you have a whole plant, but the only part of basil that you consume is the leaf.
Leaves.
But even then, you have to dry the leaf. So you have a leaf that's, you know, however big around, and then you dry it, and now it's, you know, this big around.
Sure.
And then you have to, like, take off whatever is not viable. Again, so,
Sure.
like, you have this big plant, right? And now you have this bag of product. There's no way that, you know, Hi Joe down the street is making,
Right.
you know, he's not on a freaking plantation.
Right.
Like, if he has one plant in his closet, it's just for him.
Right. And there's a lot of work to do it
And
just
there's
for
a
him.
lot of work just to do it just for him.
Right.
Like, there's a reason why grow houses, people don't live in grow houses.
Right.
Like, the entire house is retrofitted
Right.
to be a grow house, and it's hot. It's so fucking hot.
Right.
And, like, there's so much electricity going through there. And that's maybe for a very small population.
Right, and here's the thing, is like even with all of that, you're still dealing with a majority of the pot that goes to states where it's illegal comes from Mexico, comes from the cartels,
Sure.
where they murder people constantly. Like the fear and oppression that happens in Mexico, and really, let's be real, most of South America.
Yeah, no, it's awful.
Due to the cartels, because you wanted to get high, I never, like, to me, even if, you know, I was like, pot sounds great and it sounds like something I want in my life, but the cost is that, like, I'm causing death and suffering
Sure.
to millions of people because it's good for me. Never seemed like a fair trade-off in my mind. So just the idea that people have of, like, yeah, well, I mean, drugs, like, it's
fine.
It's fine, like, because Steve down the road, it's his, and Steve's cool. Like, Steve's a cool dude.
He's a cool dude.
Right, like I never understood that, and even now when you have it legal, the number of people that are, like the number of the cartel that come in with the illegal weed that's not grown in, like, say, Colorado,
Sure.
where it's legal, like the cartel brings in their illegal weed to offset prices, so that, like, you don't actually get it, like, designated from the farm where we think that it came from.
Sure.
And it's really hard to be regulated because there's no national regulation because it's still nationally illegal, and Colorado isn't really, like, using the money that they're getting from the taxation to, you know, kind of manage these things properly. And I'm not trying to, like, I don't know specifically about Colorado, but I know that generally speaking, the states where it's legal, there's still a high percentage of illegal marijuana that's being kind of snuck into these areas.
Well, when you have a commodity that is suddenly legal,
right?
So there's no way that you could guess how much of the commodity you need,
right?
Because if everybody is lying about using the illegal commodity, right?
Are you going to go to the cartels and be like, "What are your figures that we're taking over your business?"
Right. And well, not just that. So let's just make stuff up, right? So if 50% of your population is lying about actually using the commodity, so you think there's only 20%, but it's actually 50. So you're already wrong by 30.
Right.
But now it's suddenly legal, and that extra 30% that wanted to try it but never tried it because it was illegal.
Right. Also, we're getting in.
Now they want to get in. So now you're wrong by 60%.
Right.
Right? So now you're wrong by 60%, and to this suddenly legal commodity, right? And where is that extra 60% coming when you were really thinking that you were only supplying 20%?
Right.
Yeah. You've got to imagine that it has to come from the place that it's always come, the cartels.
Right. And the other part to this is with the money that the cartels are losing, because there still is some offset, like people who are using the cartel stash that are now doing the legal, you know, Colorado, California, hippie.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a gardener and you've got enough land and space to suddenly grow weed in California, I mean, let's be honest, California is super mild as far as weather goes.
Sure.
Like, you can grow anything.
Year round.
Yeah,
so it's just
why wouldn't
water issues, but that's its own thing. I'm not going to get into that. But my point is, with the, I got so distracted. You cut me off, and I'm a little lost. But no, like, the other issue is the cartels have lost a little bit of their revenue, So, like, one of the reasons why they're pushing so many hard drugs and why we're having such the opioid crisis that we're
Right.
having now is most people don't put one and one together in terms of, like, all of the opioid crisis really started when legalization started to become a thing because they're trying to offset revenue because,
Sure.
I mean, what most people don't realize is that, you know, everybody, when they think of the cartels, they think of heroin, they think of cocaine, they think of these sorts of things. A majority of their money was always marijuana because it was more socially acceptable. It was more, like,
Yeah.
there's more of it. So even though there's
Yeah.
a less of a margin that they were getting, it was such a high yield in terms of amount that was where that was happening. So it's like as that's getting cut back from them, you're getting opioids and things of that nature because they're pressing it harder
Sure.
into the poor areas. And what you're ending up with is basically the opioid and now fentanyl crisis that we're...
The fentanyl thing is
Right.
ridiculous. Like, it's just taking over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's scary. Like, fentanyl is, like, it's not a good drug.
No, not at all.
Like, not at all.
Yeah, like, I mean, you take a couple drops in it and you're done.
You're done.
Yeah.
And, yeah, like, I mean, there's just very little play with that type of thing.
Sure.
Like, all drugs are bad.
Right.
But
yeah, but like there's some drugs that are just going to kill you outright.
yeah, but there's some drugs that announce their purpose
As death.
as death. Like, fentanyl is one of them. It has one purpose: to kill you.
Yes.
Like, that's what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just to ruin your life, but just instantly
Yeah,
you're a
like
corpse.
you're done.
Yeah.
Which, from a drug dealer perspective, like, that to me is a weird business plan. Like,
Like,
you're
it
just
doesn't
gonna
make sense. Yeah.
like you're just gonna kill off your market. Like,
Right.
that to me is a little wonky. But
Well, I think, like, when you look at it from the drug dealer's perspective, is that, like, if you go back and, like, you watch The Wire or something of that nature, like, what you end up with is when you get, like, let's say that, you know, I get you hooked.
Sure.
Like, just for the whatever. So we get you on heroin, right?
Right.
We're going to fuck up your life.
Right.
It's going to fuck up your kids' life. Because here's the thing, you're going to still have kids because everyone still has sex.
Sure.
Right? And, like, sex on drugs is kind of, like, one of the allures because, you know, like, sensations and things of that nature. So you're also not as high-minded, so, like, people want sex or you need money, so you're selling yourself. The point is
I mean, yeah, the point is
You're
that
still
by and
having
large,
children.
you're still having children.
So you have this child and you're a fucked up mom because you're a junkie.
Right.
So guess what? You fucked up your kid and now...
And now they're in the environment where this is readily available, so why not?
Right, so it doesn't matter that we kill you off and give you a hot dose because
Sure.
you've probably had 4 or 5 children and we're going to get half of them.
Sure. Or even one. I mean,
Right.
realistically, if you're even 1 for 1, you're at a steady market.
Right,
Because
right,
you just are.
right. Absolutely.
That's ridiculous.
Right.
I mean,
I mean,
it's dangerous. It's a dangerous game to play.
yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah.
I just, the bottom line with weed is that it just makes me laugh because to me, all I see is that it's going to be taxed.
Right.
Like, the sin tax that's going to be associated with weed
It's going to be so
is going to be so
astronomical.
astronomical that you would have wished that that it could just be illegal again so that you could buy it under the table and not pay the sin tax.
Right.
Because like a box of cigarettes, which, I mean, I think the last time that I talked to one of my friends who lived in New York, like, a box of cigarettes in New York is like over $10.
Right.
Like,
And I'm sure that weed will be even more than that. Actually, my favorite thing, and I'm gonna end on this because we're getting a little late here, is do you remember clove cigarettes?
yeah. Yeah,
Do you know what happened?
My friend actually never smoked them.
Uh-huh.
They would put them in the air vents in their car and let the air flow through them because they like the way it smelled.
Oh. But do you know what happened to cloves? Why they're not around anymore?
I don't.
This is one of my favorite stories.
Okay, go for
ever. Okay. So, like, they're not really great for you.
No, they're terrible.
Yeah, like, they're
Which
actually...
is why he never wanted to smoke them because
Yeah.
they're worse than cigarettes,
Yes,
but they
they're
smell
actually-
great.
They're actually worse than cigarettes. So, I don't remember what country that they come from. I want to say it's India or somewhere else in Asia.
That makes sense to
It
me.
doesn't matter where. Like, let's say India, right? So they passed a law. They actually got both sides of Congress to get together to pass a law making it illegal to sell cloves because they're worse for you. And they, like, I don't remember all the details of the law, but it was something about like you can't sell cigarettes that have been sweetened.
Ah,
Right.
okay. I was going to say,
In
because
any
you have
way.
to still allow menthol.
Well, that's the thing. Clove, the company that made cloves, sued and said this was unfair business practices.
Sure.
And pointed out menthol. So there wasn't the ability for Congress to make menthols illegal, but because cigarettes are such like a weird like political issue,
Right.
they couldn't politically undo making some cigarettes legal again.
Right.
So we currently pay the clove company, the U.S. government does, more money than what they were making in selling the cigarettes.
To not import.
Right.
That's hilarious. Yeah. So part of the sin tax that we're paying to smoke the thing
is to off-put to the clove company.
Is to off-put to the clove company.
Right.
Because they can't sell here. That's hilarious. That's fantastic. So there you go. That's why you can't use them as air fresheners anymore.
Yeah.